This is a memo for question 2 to 6 of the exam. Question 1 is in a separate video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play through the memo. I'll speak about some of the questions. Others, I'll just give you the opportunity that you can pause and read the memo yourself. And I'll just give some comments on the memo as well. So obviously you can watch this at your own pace, pause, go backwards and forwards as you need. And at times you'll just be required to pause and you can check the memo against your answer. Be aware that these memos are guidelines, so sometimes there might be something different. And once you've gone through the whole exam, if you have questions, you can come ask me or one of the other teachers. So let's start with question 2. Question 2 was on the poem Touch. So I'll just put it up here a sec. You have your own copy that you can refer to as well. So question 2.1 said, let's just go down a bit. In this poem, Lewin plays on a variety of meanings and associations with the word touch. Identify and explain at least 2 of them as used in the first 3 stanzas, showing how their use is appropriate in the context of the poem. So one of the main areas of concern in assessing the answers of this poem was that it appeared that people weren't reading the question properly, because the question asks specifically about the first 3 stanzas, not about the whole poem, and then asks about at least 2 associations or meanings of the word touch. So, and again, you had to apply to the context of the poem, so it was quite a lot expected of you in this question. And one of the problem was that people weren't reading all the parts of what this question required. So here's what the memo wanted for that. You can pause and have a look at it. And note that it was for 4 marks. Okay, question 2.2. For 2 marks, shows how the avoidance of the word hands adds to the impact of the poem using substitutes. Okay, you can read that memo. Question 2.3. Now, this is the issues that came up in question 2.3 are pretty common to this kind of question, and it's a common kind of question. So this question asks about the details in stanza 5 and shows how the poem and the photo could be connected. So when a question asks for details of a poem, that means you quote. So you don't just say the poem shows how touch is important. You say the line, quote, or the words, quote, show how touch is important. And this links to the picture because, and you give details. So really, the most important word in this question is details. And that means quote, that means describe what you see in the picture. And that was a problem that really didn't happen enough in most answers to this. So you had to look at the picture and you had to refer to both of them. So here you go, you can pause and read this. Question 2.4 was straight up 2 marks. You had to identify the tone, that means name it, and give a reason. Now, a tone is pretty much you give an adjective or 2 to describe the tone. You don't say, the tone makes me feel like I'm sad. Don't just say the tone is this and a reason. So again, here's the memo. You can pause and have a look at it. Okay, question 3.1. So then the next is the poem Nightfall in Soweto. So this was Nightfall in Soweto, unseen poem by a famous South African poet, Oswald Mbuyiseni, and it speaks about night and what night means for people living in Soweto during apartheid. So I'll just scan through it. You can pause at any point. You can look it up, or you can come and ask me if you want a copy of the poem. So just what nightfall means to people in Soweto at the time. Okay, so let's have a look at the questions now. So the first question says, the strength of Mchali's poetry is the often horrific and emotional imagery. So now imagery means poetic language, figures of speech, and this question specifically asks you to explain the effectiveness of one of the comparisons, which are metaphor, simile, or personification in the poem, and explain how this comparison serves to reinforce the poet's intention. So this is effectively asking about two things. It's saying, analyze one of these things and link it to the poet's intention, explain the intention. Now, there was a big problem, not a big problem, but one of the challenges in answering this question was that people weren't effectively explaining these comparisons. So these three figures of speech that we have here are called comparative devices. And really, what you have to be able to do when you talk about them is you have to be able to say what is being compared to what and why. So with any metaphor or simile, or in fact personification too, there's basically two things which are being compared to one another. So you have the object, and then you have the thing it's being compared to. And the idea is that those two, this is the actual thing, right? Just say this is the actual thing in the poem, and this is what's used as an image to describe it. So, for example, if you say the boy runs like a cheetah, which is a simile, you're describing the boy and you're using the cheetah to describe him further. So you really have to be able to say the boy is being compared to a cheetah and why. In the case of this poem, there were lots of examples of simile, personification, and metaphor, and you really have to use your definition of these figures of speech to explain the comparison. Okay, so here it basically says that you could use any two similes or metaphors. Okay, so then here you can just pause and read this, and your explanation really had to have a detail of what the comparison is. Okay, question 3.2, who is the I? That can be representative of the larger black community or the whole black community of South Africa. So just to come back to the poem, there's stanza 3, where we see this I am the victim, I am the slaughtered. So it uses the first person, but referring actually to a bigger group. 3.3 asks the question what his words suggest about the state of man in stanza 4, which is the stanza where basically he says, man has ceased to be a man has become beast, man has become prey. What's he suggesting there? So you can have a look at the memo, you can pause and read this. And then the next question that says, make an argument for the poem being an example of protest poetry that was written during the apartheid regime. In other words, why can this be classified as protest poetry? So that second sentence in brackets really double explains to you what's being required here. An argument for this poem, you're basically saying this poem is an example of protest poetry written during the apartheid regime because... And for 2 marks, you need to be able to explain why. So once again, you can pause and just read through this answer and see what was being looked for and what was wanted from you in order to be able to make this argument for why this is protest poetry. So question 4, visual literacy. The first question is on this Woolworths advert, so you can pause and look at it if you need to reread it to remember. Okay, and then again, I'm just going to go through the memo quite quickly. Some points that were pointed out by Ms. Childs on question 4 was that generally question 4 was approached well and the answers were good. What's really important, which is a repetition of the poetry and the comprehension, is that people weren't giving enough detail, especially when you're working with image. You must describe in detail what you see in the image, so don't just say, it is an image of chips. Say what details you see in there. The same as the text, the copy, the writing in an advert or in a comic is very, very important. So don't just say the writing shows that the chips are nice. Quote exactly what it is that's in there that makes them seem tasty or whatever it is. Then the other thing is avoid constantly saying it gives the effect of. Use words like evokes, conveys, reinforces, or gives one the impression. Just use a bit more sophisticated language when explaining effects, and use your pronouns it, they. So don't just say it shows, they show, they have done. have specific pronouns when explaining this, that it's clear you know who you're talking about. And finally, when you use quotes, integrate them into sentences. So you shouldn't end a sentence, drop in a quote, put in a full stop, start your new sentence. Your quotes should be integrated or connected to your answer as part of a sentence. So I'm just going to scan through here again. You can pause and have a look at the answers. Okay, so reinforces the brand identity. You can pause and look. Question 4.2. How does the language create desire? And see that you are required to quote, and it asks for short words or short phrases to substantiate. So here's an example of a place where you should quote. Your quotes should be integrated, and single words or short phrases, not dropping in very long quotes. Okay, there you go. You can pause and look at it. Choice why to use informal language. This is a thing that could come up quite a lot in advertising. How do people choose to communicate in their copy? Okay, text 4 and 5. WWF and Surfrider Foundation. You didn't have these in color. What a treat. Here you get to see what they look like in color. You could still get quite a clear idea from the black and white in the exam itself. Okay, of the two adverts, which do you think is more effective? Explain your reasoning. So this question asks which is more effective as a whole. So you want to talk about the adverts, and here is a place where you get to use detail from the pictures, detail from the text, detail from what they're trying to do. And when you're thinking about more effective, when you're thinking about effects, you're thinking about what effect does this advert have? How will it change behavior in some way? In this case, to improve people's environmental awareness, but also could be about selling something. In adverts generally, it's about how do they change people. The effect would be how they change people's behavior in some way. And note that it's for 4 marks. So again, here are some ways you could have answered depending on which of those you chose. Okay, and just a point here, your answer doesn't have to include both adverts, but it must be detailed. So again, that word that I feel like I'm repeating a lot. Okay, question 4.5, let's look at the cartoons. So here were the 2 cartoons. Here's text 6 and text 7. And let's look at what the questions were asking about these 2 texts. Okay, so the first question asks about stereotypes. Cartoons very often rely on stereotypes. Look at what this question says. For 4 marks, you should be looking for quite a lot of detail of what this question's asking. So it asks about negative stereotype, and it asks you to refer to the speech and the physical appearance of the characters. So again, this is all about detail. Okay, there you go. You can have a look at those examples from the answer. But the main thing is that you want to say quotes, and when it asks about speech, you actually want to quote and what impression that gives. And then for the physical appearance, you actually want to give details of what it is that you see. So don't just say they look informal, they look messy. Say the way they're standing, the clothes they wear, the way they wear their cap, something like that. So again, detail. Question 4.7, explain the humor. I know I've told you this many times, but I never want to see anyone saying it's not funny. You're looking really for the techniques of humor. So in this case, there could be irony. So teenagers need sleep, but they're the ones keeping the parents awake. Irony really is when something's opposite or contradictory. So you want to explain the humorous technique. Okay, account for the man's rhetorical question. So again, you need to explain the tone of what he's saying, that he's outraged. You can pause and read that. And then the verbal and visual way in which the cartoon has made the emotions of the couple clear. And again, that is about details of what you see and what you read. So here are some things that you could have seen. So you shouldn't just say the woman's face shows that she's annoyed, or the man's face shows that he's angry. Give details from all the things that you see. So now let's look at the summary, and as I bet all of you can see the future and tell that one of the main things I'm going to say here is that people were not reading the question properly. That came up a lot. So the question asks for 3 things. Okay, so firstly it says, Frau Weiss is trying to inspire people to read. Then it says, write a summary using 3 important pieces from this article that you had on Tiny Books and Dwarsliggers. I think you pronounce that. Then it says you need to write 1 fluent paragraph of 100 words in the DSK news, which will encourage Frau Weiss to buy a set of these books. So here, what you're imagining is that you are writing an article for the DSK news. That is where this thing is going to be published. And you want Frau Weiss to read it, and you want her to read it and say, wow, these books seem so fascinating, interesting, and cool. I'm going to buy a set for the library. You're not writing her a letter directly to convince her. You're writing something that goes into the school newspaper, and based on that, she'll see it and want to have them for the library. So just to repeat myself, you're not writing a letter to her. Really read carefully what's being asked. So that was really the one thing that was important. And then something else that you needed was obviously that it had to be 3 points. So I was asking specifically for 3. And here are some examples of what those points might have been. So excuse the big gap, but here are what these points may have been. You can pause and read these. And then here are 2 attempts, attempt 1 and attempt 2 of a summary. So again, you can pause and have a look at that, see what you have in or out or where you may have gone wrong in that. So the summary would have been read for the content and also for your style of writing. So some people did really well in here and some people struggled more. It's an area you're going to practice more next year. Now let's go through the language. So Sarah said the exact same thing happened to me. It should be Sarah said the same thing happened to me. This is called tautology or repetition, where these both mean the same thing. Flying saucers are an optical illusion. That's a malapropism, not an optical conclusion. Okay, then, so it's incorrect to say the 3 other climbers and me. You would have to say the 3 other climbers and I. Then filling in the form, the pen ran dry, that is called a misplaced participle. So it should be, while I was filling in the form, the pen ran dry, because otherwise it's unclear who that filling refers to. So it needs the while. Okay, Linda walked in without a word and flops down in front of the TV. So that's a verb concord. You always want to check your verbs and they should be the same. So it would say walked in and flopped, or Linda walks in and flops. You would have had to change those both to the same tense, those verbs. Neither Mark nor Dawn. So this is kind of like they're both singular. So neither Mark, when there's a neither and a nor, then it gets the singular verb that follows it. So it's this is. Okay, then a combination of factors were the cause of the crash. It's actually a combination of factors was the cause of the crash. It's a bit of a tricky one. But a combination of factors is the subject. It's the same as saying it. It's a singular subject or a whole subject. Then the hyphen creates a compound adjective, not just a compound word. So this word, this extra special, becomes its whole own word and it describes the cake. Then finally, the apostrophe, it's incorrect because the apostrophe should come before the S because it's an irregular plural, and that's where the apostrophe of possession goes, something along those lines. And that, I believe, is it. Yes, so there we go. You've gone through the whole memo. I marked the comprehension. Ms. Nokia marked the poetry. Ms. Charles marked the visual literacy and Ms. Koch marked the summary and language. So you're welcome to approach any of them or to come speak to me. I can answer questions on any section, but just so you're aware, those are the people who marked those sections. The end.